It's my pleasure, someone who I've now heard speak twice yesterday. I'm going to hear her again tonight, and I just love her message on so many levels. Lynn Lyons is a licensed independent clinical social worker and psychotherapist based in Concord, New Hampshire. She's been in private practice for over 30 years and specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders in adults and children. She travels internationally as a speaker and trainer on the subject of anxiety, its role in families, and the need for a preventive approach at home and in schools. She appears in several media outlets, including the New York Times, NPR, Psychology Today, Good Morning America, and she's a featured expert in the documentary Anxious Nation. She has a special interest, this is also very interesting, we heard last night, in breaking the generational cycle of worry in families. She's an author and co-author of several books and articles on anxiety, including, and they're out for sale in the hallway, Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents, and The Anxiety Audit, the newest one released in 2022. She is also the co-host and great content here, co-host of the popular podcast Fluster Clucks. Go check it out. And now let's give a warm welcome to Lynn Lyons.
It's nice to be back at Parker. I've been here before. It's such a lovely venue, and I also wish to just extend my thanks to Lonnie and to all the fan people. You know, I do a lot of traveling and a lot of speaking, and when you're working with an organization where they make it easy for you in every detail, and you know where to be, and you know what time, and they make sure that you have food and all that stuff, it just is so helpful. And thank you to Dan also for hosting tonight. So we're going to talk about worry and stress, yay, anxiety. If you haven't noticed, it's been a little rocky over the last few years. There's a lot to worry about, but I just want to be clear that the issues that our young people are having with anxiety and its pal depression, which I'll talk about as well, are not new. And before COVID, things weren't really moving in a good direction. So there was a lot of concern. And then, of course, COVID happened, and it was so disruptive to so much of our kids' development and figuring out how to manage this whole thing. And so the numbers since COVID have been equally upsetting. One thing I just want you to remember is that a lot of the information that we get, a lot of the stuff that comes out that makes its way into the media, that you hear people in the media talking about, is a few years old generally. And what will be interesting is when we start hearing what are kids saying now in 2023, because a lot of what we're hearing now is what they were talking about in 2021, which was still, things were really, really discombobulated in 2021. We had not figured out much of anything. So just keep that in mind. The question that I am always asking in my head as I'm learning and talking to families, I still have a private practice, I still see families on a regular basis. I don't feel like I could do this, talking about this, if I weren't still working with families and kind of in the trenches with all of this. But the question that I'm always asking is what are we doing, inadvertently, of course, because nobody comes into my office and says, hey, I really want to see if I can stress out my kid. But although it's not hard, believe me, it's not hard, what are we doing that actually supports the anxiety? What are we doing that's making it worse? And anxiety is tricky because a lot of the things that we're going to do to love our kids and support our kids and make sure that they're okay and to make sure that they go through every open door and all the opportunities we want to provide them, all those things oftentimes actually inadvertently support the disorder. So I ask this question a lot, are we doing the disorder? I'm in schools all over the place. I go into schools and I do trainings and I do clinical trainings. Are we doing the disorder? Are we working for the anxiety? Are we giving the anxiety what it wants and what it needs in order to flourish? Now again, nobody does it on purpose, and as you're listening to me, this isn't about blame, this isn't about guilt, this isn't about saying, look, you're doing it wrong, but it is about responsibility. And I will tell you that the hardest families for me to work with, the hardest families in my practice, are the ones in which the parents don't own their own stuff. This is a really generational thing, this anxiety. Anxiety and depression are both hugely social because we are social creatures. And your kids learn from you. The reason they speak the language they speak is because you speak that language. The reason they hold the fork the way they hold the fork is because you showed them how to hold the fork. The reasons that you have certain celebrations and rituals and things that your kids will carry on long after you're gone is because we're social creatures. And then along comes anxiety. And I like to talk about anxiety as a cult leader, C-U-L-T. So it shows up. If you've been in a cult, you can back me up on this. If you're in a cult now, you don't know it. That's the whole nature of cults, right? You're just like, we're really close and we all think alike and it's just working out so well for us. Okay, if you're in a cult, the cult leader says, these are the rules you need to follow. This is what you need to do. And if you follow my rules, if you do what I say, things will go fairly smoothly. If you disobey me, if you disrupt my rules, then that's when it gets messy. And that's exactly the same thing that happens with anxiety, is that it has rules. It has things that it wants to do. It has things that it wants you to do. And when we disobey them, it causes a problem. So what do? We negotiate with it. We say, look, okay, so I get it. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be doing all of this for my kid, or maybe, at 12 they shouldn't be sleeping in our bedroom, or maybe I should let them. But it's hard, and you're tired, and it's late, and you've got to get to work, and they've got to get to school, and we want them to be happy. So there are these traps that we fall into. There are these things that really pull us in. One of the things that I know about anxiety, because I've been doing this for a really long time, is that my field, the mental health field, makes it more complicated than it has to be. I know all the anxiety disorders. I know what they are. I could give you the diagnostic criteria. We move things around. OCD used to be under the anxiety disorder category. It's got its own category, which it's fine. It likes the attention. PTSD used to be considered an anxiety disorder. It's now under the trauma and trauma-related disorders. Selective mutism used to be the purview of speech and language people, but that got moved back under the anxiety disorders. So there's all these different categories. We can slice it super thin. And my field is often pretty trendy, too. There are things that are more popular, diagnoses that come up more, things that people hear about and then worry about with their kids. But if we simplify it, if we take it up to this next level, if we really look at what anxiety wants, it's certainty and comfort. It wants to know exactly what's going to happen, and it wants to make sure that you're comfortable as you move through life. So what happens? We start putting interventions in place. We start saying, you know what, he has a really difficult time if he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, so we're just going to make sure he knows exactly what's going to happen. I see that in schools all the time. He has difficulty with transitions, so we're going to make sure that he gets warnings 10 minutes ahead of time so that he knows what's coming up. I'm going to make sure that I give him a lot of reassurance and a lot of information. When we do that, we are serving the anxiety disorder. Several years ago, a school counselor in my town called and said, "Can you see this little second grader? She's having a really hard time getting into school." And I said, "No, I'm sorry. It's my busiest time, the beginning of the school year." And I said to her, "Look, you know what to do, right? You just do the stuff. Like, just do it. You know how to do it." And she said, "Oh, okay." So then I ran into her a little while later. And I said, "How's it going with that little girl?" And she said, "Oh, fantastic. We came up with the best plan. It's great." And I said, "What'd you do?" And she said, "Well, she has the sweetest second grade teacher. So mom brings her to school about 10 or 15 minutes before all the other kids. And the teacher brings her in. They go over the day in detail so she knows exactly what's going to happen. They color, they have a little hot chocolate, they just ease into the day, and it's great." And my outside voice said, "Well done." And my inside voice said, "That would be the exact opposite of what I would do. But not my circus, not my monkey." So I was like, bye. I get a call several weeks later. It is now the middle of December. And I live in Concord, New Hampshire. and it's icy, just as it is here in Chicago. And that lovely second grade teacher slipped on the ice, boom, and shattered her elbow. And she was going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. And this poor little girl was a disaster by day 2. Because the whole plan had been, we need to make sure that her cult leader, her anxiety, has exactly what it needs in order to move forward. It's just impossible to pull that off. And what happens when we look at what anxiety demands and what it does, and how it gets in the way of kids' development, it is important to remember that anxiety does not care at all if your child makes friends or goes to school or has a sleepover or goes to summer camp or learns how to ride a horse or sticks with their piano lessons or gets a job or gets a girlfriend or a boyfriend or their driver's license. Anxiety doesn't care. Anxiety says, unless you meet my criteria, we're out. And avoidance works like a charm. Avoidance is a really, really effective way of getting rid of symptoms. Now, this definition of anxiety is one that I particularly like. David Barlow is retired now, but he ran Boston University's Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. And he described anxiety as an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of your resources to deal with it. And I do this a lot. In my office, I'm doing this a lot. Because what happens is we see that what the anxiety does is it throws us out of whack. Anxiety is about promoting things that are not emergencies into emergencies. If it's really an emergency, we don't say, oh, she was so anxious when she was being chased by that grizzly bear. When you are having a fear response, when there is actually something that is life-threatening, and you have a response, it is not an overestimation of the problem. It's a problem. And then we try and bring the resources up. If you go to the emergency room with a significant emergency, you want people there who have the resources to deal with it. But when you are anxious, when you are telling yourselves those catastrophic stories, when you get into that process of watching the movie that anxiety wants you to watch, emergency, no resources. Or at least you're out of touch with the resources, because anxiety is really good at disconnecting you from problem solving. And when you think about how this thing plays out in families, one of the things that's really important to recognize is that the research is really clear that this thing runs in families. There is a genetic push. We know that temperament is genetically mediated. You know that some kids come out like chihuahuas and some kids come out like golden retrievers, right? I mean, that's just the way that it works. But when we're looking at how this thing is passed down, the genetic push has a part to play, but modeling very often, particularly as kids move into middle school and adolescence, has a larger part to play. They are watching, they are hearing, they are paying attention to what we do. They are paying attention to how we perceive the world. There are 4 things that we see pretty consistently with kids that are raised by anxious parents. One is that they're not very good tolerating uncertainty. They're not very good independent problem solvers. They score low on the autonomy scales, and they perceive the world as a more dangerous place than kids not raised in anxious environments. Now, the goal is not to have kids that don't recognize danger. The goal isn't to take a kid and say, look, anything goes, right? But the skill that they don't develop is the ability to differentiate between levels of risk. What we want kids to be able to do is assess reasonable risk. And if they are seeing the world as a dangerous place in that global way, in that broad way, then they don't learn the difference between, trying out for the school play, gosh, it feels socially risky and not everybody's going to get a part, and there's a risk that I could be rejected or disappointed, but it's not life-threatening. We want them to recognize that. And then on the other hand, we want them to recognize that getting into the car with somebody who's been drinking is a seriously bad decision. But if they hear from us all the time, be careful, watch out, it's called safety chatter. Watch out, don't do this, the world is dangerous, then they lose that ability. We don't give them the room to come to those conclusions. So there are some qualities about anxiety that are just so important to pay attention to. And I think this is one of the things in terms of simplifying this thing, demystifying these things. This is what I want kids to know. This is what I want you to know. This is what I want families to know. Because by the way, I don't see kids alone in my practice. And it still astounds me, it still does, that somebody would say, well, my 10-year-old is in therapy for their anxiety. And I go, well, what are the goals you're working on? I'm not a part of it. Well, what are the assignments that you do between appointments? Oh, well, we haven't gotten that far. Well, how long has your child been seeing this person? Well, for 6 months. Well, what are they doing? Well, they're building rapport. And this is when I will say, okay, look, if you're a therapist working with kids and it takes you more than 6 months to build rapport, you might want to consider a different line of work. It is so, so important that this process is active, that you are involved, that you are conveying to your kids what you are working on, how this worry thing works. It is predictable, it is redundant, and it is persistent. Anxiety shows up when we feel, as one little boy said to me, on the spot. When you are being evaluated, when you are being judged, when you do feel as if you don't have the resources to handle it. When you're being pushed too hard, when you feel overwhelmed, when something scary is happening. It is predictable, it just doesn't arrive out of nowhere. It is redundant. I love my job, I really do love what I do, but I say the same thing over and over and over again. Because what you worry about, the thing that you worry about, is the least interesting thing to me. What I am most interested in is how worry shows up, what it does, how it interacts, and how much power we give it. And it is persistent. It's going to come back. We all have worry. You cannot be a human being and experience zero worry. Some people worry more than others, but we've got this thing called a prefrontal cortex, which makes it easy and even compelling for us to imagine things that haven't happened yet. That's what worry is, really. It's the ability to project into the future. It's the ability to what if. It's the ability to watch the movie of the bad thing that's not happening but could happen. So couple that with this desire for certainty and comfort, and you've got a powerful cult leader on your hand. And then to make it even more powerful, it's paradoxical. The more we try and get rid of this thing, the stronger it gets. The more that we say, I shouldn't feel this way, or I have to get rid of this sensation, or I don't like the way this feels, or what's going on with me, the more that we try and push this thing away, the more that we try and get rid of it, the more that we put things in place that are designed to eliminate it, the worse it gets. Anxiety is a normal human response. And the way it becomes a disorder is when we spend a lot of time trying to avoid it. We can allow it or we can avoid it. And when we allow it, when we recognize it, when we talk about it, when we own it, when we accept it, it doesn't get nearly as powerful. Because in order to make it go away, you've got to stop doing things that are important to your development, like hanging out with people if you're a teenager, or trying out for the school play, or you've got to find things that will make it go away. If you are a socially anxious 16-year-old and you discover alcohol, it is a miracle drug. And it is often the first in a series of miracle drugs. So, what do we want to pay attention to? Well, my goal is not to get rid of anything. And this is interesting. When people come to see me, nobody comes to see me and says, I don't have a 7-year-old sitting in front of me or a 14-year-old sitting in front of me. And they're saying, well, my goal is really to just shift my relationship with my worry. I'm really just looking to change the dynamics between us. No, what do they say? I got to get rid of this thing. Make me feel better. I don't want to feel this way. That's the normal inclination, of course. what has happened over the last few years, and this is truly different for me in the last few years, is that kids are more and more afraid of the emotions that they're feeling. They're not sure what's wrong with them. They're self-diagnosing like crazy. They're using this clinical language, which I'm glad they're familiar with it. I'm glad that we've done a good job of bringing this into the conversation. But they're so worried about what they feel. There is a really big range of normal in human beings, a really big range. And yet it seems that it's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and parents are so concerned about their kids. So when we have a child that's sad, or we have a child that is melting down, if we have a child that's really stressed out, parents are reacting in such a way that they're getting right in there with them, overestimating the problem and underestimating our resources to deal with it. So we've got to normalize this thing. And we've got to be aware, too, of the information that kids are getting about their mental health, about anxiety, and about depression. This may just be me, but I just don't feel like Khloe Kardashian is the best person to be advising your kids about OCD. There's a lot of information out there that is actually the opposite of what I would teach clinically. For example, there are many places that you can go if you have a fear of vomiting. It's called emetophobia. It's a pretty powerful fear, and it's not at all uncommon. And it's a tricky one to deal with because guess what? You're going to throw up. And the one thing that vomit has going for it is the element of surprise. So it's tricky in that way. But you can go on sites, you can go on apps where with other people that are afraid of throwing up, and they're keeping track of how many days they've gone without vomiting. That's the exact opposite of what I would do if I were treating somebody with this fear. And I could give you so many, many different examples of that. So many quizzes that you can take where you can diagnose yourself with everything from ADHD to borderline personality, which has made a comeback in the last few years, to autism, to bipolar. Things that 16-year-olds shouldn't be diagnosing themselves based on quizzes that they take on TikTok. Remember we used to take quizzes in Cosmo, guys, right? Or 17 magazine, right? You find out if you're a white wine kind of girl or a red wine kind of girl. You find out if are you a Samantha or a Carrie, right? You weren't deciding whether or not you had a severe mental illness based on 10 questions on a TikTok app. We need to pay attention to that. The language that we want to start using with kids, because we want to normalize this thing, we want to open the conversation not about what's wrong with you, but about what's normal. Parenting right now feels to me as if parents are walking a tightrope, that they're so afraid that one false move and they're going to plummet. I said to a mother once, not too long ago actually, parenting is not like being on the bomb squad. Okay? Like every day you're like red wire, blue wire, with catastrophic consequences. It is okay for you to feel uncertain. In fact, it is necessary for you to feel uncertain as you're learning and growing, as you're figuring things out. But it's easy to keep this loop going. That you have a thought or a feeling, this is what I want kids to learn about. This is what I want them to talk about. How do you keep this thing going? What do you do when those sensations show up that make it worse? And what's interesting, this was happening before COVID, but it certainly kicked up a little bit, is that when I'm talking to teenagers, and I have the audacity, clearly in their eyes, to suggest that there's something they can do. If you're anxious, there are things that you are doing that are making it better and making it worse. If you are depressed, there are things that you are doing that are making it better and making it worse. When people are depressed, they make decisions that make their mood worse. When people are anxious, they avoid in a way that increases their anxiety. So one of the things you can do with your kids is you can have these conversations about these three categories, right? So what do you do that makes your mood better? What do you do that makes you feel better? What do you do that makes your mood worse? What are the things you know about you that will make you feel worse. And then the third category, which is super important, is what do you do that makes you feel better in the short term, but is a bad long-term solution? This is when I talk about the difference between self-care and self-medication, this is how I differentiate between the two. When you are practicing good self-care, which is not just one thing, it should be a habit sustained over time, you don't feel regret afterwards. When you are self-medicating, it may feel good in the moment, but you don't feel great afterwards. When I go for a walk with one of my best friends, I never say, oh, I can't believe I went for a walk with Christine. Why did I do that? If I get enough sleep, oh, why did I get 8 hours of sleep? What was I thinking? Self-care. But, oh, God, why did I drink all that wine? Right? The first 2 Oreos were good. The next 17, not so great. Why did I stay up so late binging those episodes on Netflix when I knew that I would be tired the next day? We want to talk to kids about their operating system, about the things that makes them feel better and worse, and we want them to learn from us that that's emotional management. That's brain management. That's mood management. Now, let me go through this with you because I don't do presentations without this slide. And sometimes there are people who have seen me multiple times, they've come to my events, and I say to them, look, you're going to hear me do this again. Because what is interesting to me is how few young people know this information. Even if they've been in therapy for years, even if they've done a lot of their own research. How anxiety works, the connection between our brain and body. Remember, my job is to demystify this thing. My job is to give information so that it doesn't feel so big and overwhelming, so our first response isn't to try and get rid of it. So let me go through this because this is how this thing works. I'm going to put down my clicker because I need my hands. All right. So there's some sort of anxious event that happens. It could be happening in the moment. You're about to get on the plane, you're about to take the test, you're about to stand up in front of your classmates and give a presentation. You just heard that your friend went home from school because she threw up, and so now, whoa, right, you're worried about that. It could be anything. If you have generalized anxiety disorder, which just means that you're an equal opportunity worrier, whatever comes across your screen, you'll grab onto, you're just worrying. So there's an anxious event and you're anticipating it, or it's right there in front of you. And anxiety is a lot about anticipation. It's a lot about the stories that we tell. It's a lot about the catastrophic outcomes that we imagine. So it's going on, and you're up here in your prefrontal cortex. This is where we imagine, this is where you're thinking about things. So you're watching the bad outcome video. As a parent, if you're an anxious parent, your kids go off to do something and you're just worrying, or you're thinking about what's going to happen to them, and you're just tense and nervous about what's going to come at you. And as you're doing this up here in your prefrontal cortex, the sophisticated, fancy, new part of our brain, and you're making this movie, you're watching this movie, you send a danger message, an uh-oh message, an oh-no message to another part of your brain called your amygdala, small midbrain primitive. This is the smoke maker, and this is the smoke detector. And like most smoke detectors, it doesn't have the ability to differentiate between big bad smoke, the basement is on fire, and not so problematic smoke, you left the bagel in the toaster too long. When the amygdala gets a danger message from you, when it gets an oh no message, it does not say, oh, for the love of Pete, are we going to do this again? Right? You got a 95 in chemistry and you freak out before every chemistry quiz. Why are we doing this? Or there's no such thing as vampires. When you're watching the bad vampire movie and you're freaking out, there's no such thing. It doesn't do that. When it gets a message, its response, its only response, its very loud, unnuanced response is, my girl's in trouble, or my guy's in trouble. And it immediately gets to work firing your body up because its job is to save your life. So the amygdala sends a message down to your adrenals. We're now going to pump you full, little spray bottles, not really, but That's what I tell kids, like little spray bottles of adrenaline, noradrenaline, also known as epinephrine, norepinephrine. These chemicals now are going to activate and deactivate the systems in your body that are designed to keep you alive. This is a life or death situation, and it's not messing around. So what does it do? Well, it wants blood and oxygen to these big running away muscles. So we're going to increase your heart rate, and we're going to increase your breathing. We want the oxygen in and the CO2 out. You keep doing this for a while, you hyperventilate. You start feeling dizzy. You start feeling lightheaded, a very common symptom of people when they're anxious. So now your heart is pounding, you're feeling a little dizzy. Your pupils will dilate so you can scan the environment, see where the grizzly bear is. We're going to throw a little extra blood clotting stuff into your system. In case the grizzly bear bites you or rips off your arm, you'll clot faster. You don't really feel that, but I mean, that comes in handy in certain situations, not if you're about to take a math test. Your muscles are going to get all activated and ready. So if you are chronically stressed, right, if you were just getting these surges, right, this is why people develop those stress-related symptoms like TMJ or headaches, or you go to get a massage and the massage therapist says, God, what the heck is going on with your trapezius, right, because you've been like this. Now, it also deactivates certain systems in your body because it is trying to be efficient. It's got a job to do, and it's not going to mess around with the things it doesn't need in the moment. So one of the things that happens is your prefrontal cortex zizzes out a little bit. Your higher level thinking, we don't need that right now. We're just trying to get rid of a grizzly bear. We're going to go with primitive instincts rather than problem solving. We're also going to pull the blood from your digits, because you don't run away from a grizzly bear on your fingertips or your toes, right? We want these big muscles to be activated, which means that your fingers, your toes might feel tingly or numb. They might feel cold. It can happen in your face too. The other thing that happens, and this is really, really important information that kids should know, is that the digestive system goes offline. Your brain, your body, very smartly says, we are not going to waste any energy right now on digesting your tuna fish sandwich. We're going to cease operations and send the energy elsewhere. When your digestive system stops working, you don't feel good. You feel nauseous. People get constipated. The digestive system is highly responsive to emotional stuff, but it also goes offline when other systems need to ramp up. And when I say to kids, and you can use this language because they like it, when things aren't working well from whole to whole, you don't feel very good. We like smooth, seamless, whole-to-whole operations. Now, how many kids have stomach aches, lose their appetite, don't want to eat the morning before they're taking a test? And nobody has told them, yeah, you know what happens is that your worry has kind of fired up your amygdala, got your body going, and now your digestive system has gone offline for a little bit. That's normal. It's okay. We're not going to shove a granola bar down your gullet because right now, nothing's happening. But we don't talk to kids about it in that way. We treat them as if they're sick. We take their temperature. We reassure them. It is important for kids to have this information because it's all normal. So what happens? You have this physical response, right? So not everybody is aware of all these things at once. There are people who are tummy ache people and headache people and numb finger people, but you have these symptoms. So say you don't know what this is. Say you've never experienced this before, and you go, oh no, what's wrong with me? I might be having a heart attack. I'm sick. So you go to the emergency room, you go to the pediatrician, you go to the school nurse, you hide under your bed. You don't know what's wrong. Or somebody explains this to you. You know what? It's your anxiety. This is what anxiety does. This is what your body does when it's stressed out. And you go, okay, thank you for that information, but I still don't want to feel this way. So when those symptoms start to come up, you say, oh no, not this. I can't handle this. What if I throw up? What if I have diarrhea? What if my face gets all red? What if I remember, or what if I forget everything when I'm taking the test? Oh no. And your poor little amygdala says, yikes, we're getting more danger messages. Quick, juice her up some more. And you're off to the races. This is how it happens for everybody all the time. 40% of people who go to the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack are having panic. 40%. And a very small percent, probably like 1%, maybe 2%, actually get valid, helpful information about what to do about the panic. So we figure out it's not a heart attack, and then they say, you're not having a heart attack, you're probably having a panic attack, off you go. If 40% of people who show up in an ER with cardiac symptoms, or thinking they're having cardiac symptoms, actually are having panic, don't you think this should be laminated somewhere? Don't you think that the ER people should go through this cycle? Because I will tell you, the relief that people feel when you lay it out, when they understand it, so now we can talk about it in a different way. We are not going to get rid of anxious events. It's impossible. Good luck with that. Even if you're agoraphobic, even if you've been in your bedroom for 25 years, you're still in there worrying about what's going to happen to make you have to leave your bedroom. Anxious things happen. Uncertain things happen. One of the homework assignments that I give to families all the time is that I want you to go around the dinner table and I want everybody to talk about the unpredictable thing that happened today and how did you handle it. Kids need to hear us. And look, you don't have to tell the horrible stuff, right? You don't have to share everything. You don't tell your 5-year-old, well, I forgot to pay the mortgage and so they're repossessing the house, right? But make something up, right? The milk was sour. I went into the refrigerator to get the milk for my coffee and it was sour and I had to deal with it. Or I went outside this morning and the tire was flat and I had to figure out how to manage that. Talk about, and then what did you do? What'd you do, Mom? Well, I did this and I did this. How do we manage when things don't go the way that they expect? Anxious events are going to happen. We're not going to get rid of worried thoughts because you have a prefrontal cortex. We're not going to get rid of your amygdala, even though many kids have said, why couldn't I just have surgery and have my amygdala removed? When you need your amygdala, you really need your amygdala. We're not going to get rid of physical responses. They happen quickly, don't they? I mean, we've all had that happen. You look in your bag and your wallet is gone. I remember getting pickpocketed on the subway when I was at BU for graduate school. Open my backpack to pay for my groceries and my wallet is gone. Right? Rush of symptoms, of course. We're going to have physical symptoms. But the place where we begin to make a difference, the place where we can help stop this movement into paralyzing, cultish anxiety disorders is right in that green rectangle. Because the response that makes this into a disorder is the I have to get rid of it. The defensive response. What's going on? I can't feel this way. I can't handle it. It is so different when we start to teach kids to say, yeah, you know what, this is okay that I feel this way. And in fact, the two words that I cannot live without in my clinical work are, of course. Of course you feel this way. Of course. Of course your heart is broken. Of course you're disappointed. Of course you're anxious as you step in. Of course, of course, of course. I don't get anxious before I speak. I like it, I always have, it's not a big deal, except when there are a lot of people that I know and care about in the audience. I did a talk a few years ago in Concord, and I hadn't spoken in Concord for a long time, and we were filming it. You can watch it. It's my Mr. Rogers talk. But that was in Concord, New Hampshire, and when I came out on stage, it was a lovely venue that held about 300 people. We sold it out. I saw all the people that I love the most in the world. My parents were there, my siblings were there, my best friends were there. There were a lot of old clients there that had come to see me. And my hands were shaking. And if you watch and if you listen, my voice was a little like this. And you see my hands are probably like this as I was talking at the beginning because I knew they were shaking. But I didn't say to myself backstage when I could hear my heart pounding a little bit, I didn't say, well, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't be feeling this way. I said, of course you feel this way, Lynn, because you're going to step out and you're going to see all these people. Now, it sounds a little counterintuitive, right? All the people that love you the most, why would I be nervous in front of them? And I don't know the explanation for that, but that's just the way it is. If we can begin to address that green rectangle, if we can begin to talk to kids and normalize this very human process, they're going to do better, because it is the avoidance that makes it a problem. This is how we're afraid, right? This is what we do. This is what kids do. Oh my gosh, this feels terrible. I can't handle this. I got to get out of this. Okay, so now, good, I get out of the elevator, or I get off the plane, or I don't go to school, or I don't do the test. I immediately feel better, and it gets reinforced. Avoidance works, but it leads to depression. Because when you are a little kid, and you are anxious, and you are a little worrier, it is okay for parents to support you. So they're going to go to the birthday party with you, or they're going to hang out at your swimming lesson. Or if you're going to have a play date and you're afraid of dogs, we're going to have the kids come to our house instead of going over to Sammy's house because she's got a dog. And then you hit middle school and adolescence, and it's no longer appropriate or possible for parents to manage your environment in that way. And oftentimes our instinct is to step into schools, to step into these arenas and to say to the other adults, we need to make sure that my child doesn't feel this way. And it gets in the way of them developing the ability to tolerate uncertainty, to be independent problem solvers, to manage autonomy, and to be able to assess reasonable risk. So, what do? Well, we make sure that as we're helping our kids, we don't use what I call elimination strategies. That we don't rely on this language of elimination. That we don't give them things in their toolbox that are basically explicitly or implicitly designed to get rid of the worry. We've got to make room for it. The main trap is when we focus on elimination in the absence of skill building. When we accommodate the disorder in the absence of skill building. The accommodation model is really, really necessary and important for all sorts of things for kids in education. There is a long list of things. If you are dyslexic, if you have a processing disorder, if you have ADHD, if you have autism, if you have cerebral palsy, if you have type 1 diabetes, if you have a concussion. But when we look at anxiety, accommodation, the desire to get rid of it, the need to eliminate it in the absence of skill building doesn't work. And what I see very often is that this accommodation model that is so valuable in so many different arenas, we just took it and we plopped it down on top of anxiety disorders without talking to the people who know how to treat anxiety disorders. Because here's what the research says. The more that a family accommodates the anxiety, the more likely it is for me to fail at my job. My job is to help a family stop accommodating. My job is to pull people out of the cult. That's why I work with the whole family. They're all in the cult. Even if there's a non-anxious parent, that non-anxious parent got sucked into the cult because, what am I going to do? Sometimes we leave grandma in the cult because she's been in there for a really long time and it's just not worth the effort. But my goal is to figure out how we move away from accommodation. So when somebody says to me, well, what are the accommodations you would put in place for an anxious kid? I say, in the absence of skill building, I'm not doing the disorder. Skill building means that we step in. Because the problem with elimination is that we've got that paradox going on. We've got that paradox. The more we try and get rid of it, the stronger that it gets. Here are some common elimination strategies. So distraction. Distraction is not all bad. If you've got a toddler, distraction is really saving your life at this point. Right? Oh, look over there. But distraction is often taught to anxious kids, and to adults for that matter, in a way that says, I can't feel this. So if I start having this anxious thought or this anxious sensation, I need to do something to get rid of it. I need to get on my phone. I need to play a video game. I need to not go to that place where I might feel this. I need to eliminate it. I much prefer the term shifting or unhooking, where we allow it to show up. Hello, nice to see you. We're going to pull the worry out. We're going to give it a name. It's the cult leader. And when I pull it out and give it a name, I'm not pulling out the thing that you worry about. That's the content. So if you're afraid of frogs, I'm not pulling out a frog. If you're afraid of dogs, I'm not pulling out a dog. I'm making it into a character. I'm personifying it. I'm helping you and your kids see what this thing does because it is predictable, redundant, and persistent. And it says some version all the time of blah, 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 and you can't handle it. And the blah, blah, blah is just whatever it happened to grab onto. Because the thing that you're worried about is not the thing. So instead of doing distraction, we do acknowledgement. Hello, nice to see you. Oh, Joanne, yes, you always show up on Sunday nights. Hi, Joanne, nice to see you. Yeah, you've got no news for me. I find you boring. I find you repetitive. Certainly persistent. You're sort of like mosquitoes in New England, right? We know you're going to show up at a certain time. We don't like you, but we have to accept that you exist. Calming and breathing. Now, I don't use the term calm very often, which is kind of interesting because I'm an anxiety specialist. Calm is too high a bar for me. So if I say to a kid, well, in order for you to step into this situation, right, you're socially anxious and it's hard for you to ask questions in class or it's hard for you to engage with people that you don't know. So we're going to work on you being calm before you step in. Good luck. Good luck. I want you to know that you're going to have those feelings, right? Remember that cycle, that first half of the cycle. So I don't use the term calm. I don't like when schools have calming corners. I'd rather have them have a reset room or a reboot room because that's how breathing is really, really helpful. Because when we do breathing, when we breathe in a different way, because you remember, when we take a slow breath in, our brain, our body, our lungs say, hey, she's not breathing like a poodle at the vet, right? So maybe her life is not in danger in this moment. When we teach kids how to breathe, it's a way to reboot and reset so then they can step into the uncertainty. But I will tell you, I have talked to thousands of kids at this point. And many of them have been in a lot of therapy. And I say, what have you learned to manage your worry? And they say, distraction and breathing. It's not enough. If you are worrying about people judging you, breathing isn't going to address that. We have to change the relationship that you have with your worry when it shows up. And the other things in the list, again, they sound good, right? I'm just going to make sure. If I say to a family when I'm first meeting them, how have you successfully, do you think, how have you successfully managed this worry? And they go, oh, well, what we've discovered is that as long as she knows everything that's going to happen, we're good. But as soon as that routine changes, so we work really hard to make sure she knows exactly what's going to happen. We provide a lot of information and we give a lot of reassurance. A parent might say to me, well, he gets really worried about, what if this happens, Mommy? Or what if this happens? Or am I supposed to worry about this? Or how this is going to go? And the parent steps in instinctively, understandably, and says, it'll be fine. You'll be okay. You're not going to throw up. Right? We haven't eaten meatballs since 2011 because that was the last time you threw up. It's going to be okay. We give reassurance over and over and over and over and over again. When we are dealing with worry, we need to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. Let me make you uncomfortable for a moment. Right now, none of you know that all the people you love are okay. In this moment, we live with the doubt of not knowing all the time. And the more that we try and take that away, the more that we set that as the goal for our kids, for ourselves, the more that we track our kids the more that we follow them, that we know exactly where they are, that we know exactly what they're doing, that they know exactly where we are, the more that we are setting this up, that the goal is certainty, you should not track your kids. If you are using Life 360 or one of those other apps, I recommend you delete it tonight. And I'm serious. And I know that as I say that, because I heard it today, in fact, people will be like, well, but we only use it because blah, 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 blah. You don't need it. Here's the other thing we know about tracking apps. You start when they're a certain age and you think, well, when they get older, I'll stop. The research shows that you don't. I was talking to a woman who is the head of a school, a private school in Canada, on the east coast of Canada. And she told me that she was tracking her 26-year-old daughter, who is in a PhD program for psychology, who's on the west coast of Canada. When you say to your kids, I need to know exactly where you are, and then when they learn that they need to know exactly where you are creating an environment that supports the cult leader by demanding certainty. Remember in the old days, people? If you couldn't remember a song lyric, remember how we just had to live with that, right? Who sang that song all day? We just had to live with it. We had to carry that uncertainty around with us all day. Not anymore. But it's good practice for you to not know these things. The skill of flexibility, the ability to tolerate when things don't go the way that you've planned, the ability to know that you are a malleable person, that your brain is malleable, that your thoughts are malleable, that your emotions are malleable. This idea of a permanent identity based on anxiety, depression, this almost militant demand of our young people that we accept who they are because they have anxiety or they have depression is the exact opposite message that I want to convey as somebody who treats these disorders, because I am working on conveying positive expectancy, which is the belief that things can change. David Yeager did a study in 2016 in which his goal was to see how could he decrease the stress of kids in high school, right? Big goal, slick intervention. He took freshmen in high school, and at the beginning of their freshman year, he talked to them in written exercises. I mean, it wasn't extensive. It was an introductory welcome to high school. And he talked about the variability, the malleability of socially relevant traits, was the phrase that he used, which is really, really important as you're moving through high school. These kids reported that as they moved through high school, the ones who got this information, they were less stressed compared to the control group. Significantly so, because they had in their brain when something didn't go right, when they were having difficulty, when there was some sort of difficulty in a relationship or they failed at something, they had this message, people can change. That simple message of malleability is really important. And I hear a lot of the opposite these days. This is who I am. But particularly with a young person, it's not who they are. They're a work in progress. And in fact, they did some research, and guess what they found out? You can teach old dogs new tricks. Our brains are more malleable than we ever thought. Neuroplasticity, the ability for new pathways to be created, and we can create negative ones and we can create positive ones. The goal of emotional management. It means that when you have a feeling, not that we're going to get rid of it, but that we're going to manage it. That we talk to kids ahead of time. That it's okay if you feel this way. It's not okay that you do whatever you want with those feelings. And I talk to kids about driving their life bus, right? You're driving your life bus, and all your feelings are on your bus. And sometimes one feeling is right behind you, and sometimes another feeling is way in the back. But I'm not going to put your feelings in the driver's seat. I'm not going to let your worry or your anger or your rage or your contempt or whatever happens to show up be in charge of you. It is a part of you, but it is not all of you, which is why pulling it out and giving it a name is such an effective move to make. And when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about depression, when we're talking about anxiety, as soon as we create some space, as soon as we become an observer of the pattern, not the content, but the pattern, we are giving our kids an enormously helpful skill. Viktor Frankl talks about the space between. The space between the stimulus and the response, where we get to think about and have some efficacy in what we do next. I talk to kids all the time. This is a step 2 problem, I tell them. This is a step 2 problem. Step 1, you're going to have a thought, a feeling, a sensation. A lot of them, not even conscious, right? Stuff just bubbles up. Step 2, that's what we're working on. That's emotional management. And work in progress, right? The reason that toddlers are so amusing and also frustrating is because they have very poor emotional management skills, right? They're all over the place. We're consistently moving. And then you hit adolescence and puberty hits, and you have another little emotional management problem. But it's okay. We're consistently working on it. What you model makes a difference, and how you talk about it makes a difference. And when you say about yourself, there's nothing I can do about that, you are giving a very powerful message to your kids that there's nothing they can do about that. Parental experiential avoidance is a research term which refers to parents who have great difficulty tolerating their own distress and the distress of their children. And not surprisingly, it is a fast lane into creating anxious kids. Parents who are anxious, this is not a good statistic, but it's real and it's changeable. Parents that are anxious are 6 to 7 times more likely to create an anxious child. This thing runs in families. So, in the moment, emotional management starts with your regulation and your modeling. It starts with that. And in the freak out, no learning happens. And so that's when we do the breathing. That's when we do the resetting. That's when we do the rebooting. And oftentimes it's when we should do the movement. Movement is really underutilized, in my opinion. Both long-term, right, moving, we know so many research studies from the University of that exercise helps with our mood. But movement in the moment, remember, this is an energized system. So if your kid is freaking out, instead of having them try and relax and be still and empty their brain, how about they get up and do 50 jumping jacks? Take them outside, run them like a dog, go for a walk. Movement helps. And after they're out of that place, after that out of that place, remember where their prefrontal cortex has sort of zizzed out, after they've regulated themselves a little bit, then this is the language that we want to marinate them in. We want them to hear over and over and over again that we're going to allow these feelings to show up, that we're going to make room for them, that we're going to step into situations. How do we practice managing our worry? We step into the worry, and when it shows up, we have an opportunity to alter our response. Avoidance doesn't work. The brain learns experientially. Some writing is helpful. So I do all the time. When I give kids writing assignments, it's basically, I want you to keep a success journal. When I hear that people are keeping worry journals, they're writing down every worry that they have. When did they worry? How did it happen? What were they thinking? I know it doesn't matter to me what you worry about. But I want you to step into situations of uncertainty, discomfort, and I want you to come back and report to me, how did you manage? And maybe if you didn't manage it well, then let's do a little post-game analysis. How do you think your worry got you? What do you think it did? How did it suck you in? The more we talk about this, the more we give it context, the more equipped they are to handle. The more they'll step in. They need to hear that they can tolerate uncertainty. Because despite all of your best efforts, it's going to show up. If the goal is to make sure that our kids don't feel worried, that is a road to depression. Because in order to make that happen, they're going to start avoiding things. Their world is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. The goal is to create autonomy, which means they are going to do things behind your back that you don't know about. Because that's what you did as a teenager. Remember when the phones were attached to the wall? And you would be on the phone with your friend? And your mom picked up? Did you say to your friend, Amy, my mom is just going to listen in on this conversation. She wants to know exactly what we're up to. You wouldn't say that, would you? It's about connection. Kids will respond to us when they trust us, when they see us modeling, when they know that we understand, and when we don't freak out. When they can come to us and say, here's the situation, or I'm struggling with this, and we keep our own worry in check, then they can trust us. And we are modeling for them. It's okay that you're feeling this on the inside. But how do we problem solve? How do we keep moving through? This is the message that I want kids to have. As you are learning and growing, you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's to be expected rather than avoided. And just some more language that I use all the time. You are a work in progress. Feelings can be big and normal. Once we begin to talk to our kids in this way, then we'll get back to a place where emotional management is the norm, rather than this panic that we feel about our kids' emotional health. This mental health crisis. There are things that you can do, and the message I want you to leave here with is that small things matter. And even if you just started saying to your kids, of course, that would be a really great step in the right direction. So thank you.